Jučer smo u Interuniverzitetskom centru u Dubrovniku imali priliku pogledati film Nürnberg, lekcija za danas. Film Stuarta Schulberga kojeg je napravio 1948. godine za potrebe suđenja visoko pozicioniranim numberškim oficirima nakon Drugog svjetskog rata. Film iz kojeg svi možemo nešto naučiti, njegova kćer Sandra Schulberg prikazuje svugdje po svijetu, a sada je na red došao i Dubrovnik.
In Germany, it was used as part of the denazification campaign, but Germans were not forced to watch the film. There had been earlier films, earlier in 1945, made by the American occupation that Germans were forced to see. But this film they played in regular movie theaters, and they just hoped that the German public would want to see it out of curiosity. Because they had learned the year before that if you force someone to see it, they reject it. So they had learned that lesson. And this time around, they just invited people to see it. They didn't force them. At the same time, this was the year that, a few months after the film was opened in Germany, the Russians, the Soviets, blockaded Berlin. And suddenly, Americans and other people who'd been involved with the trial began to feel that the Soviets were no longer our allies, and that it would be embarrassing to show the film, because in the film you see the Americans and the French and the Brits all working together with the Soviets. And of course, during the latter part of the war, it was one big team effort to defeat the Germans. So this became, you could say, politically incorrect. The amazing thing about this film, and you know, the film is 70 years old, is that people have, in very different countries, coming from very different cultures, they have a very similar response to the film. And that is that I have found that whether it's teenagers in the Guatemalan highlands, or whether it's high-ranking police officers in North Vietnam, or now just Vietnam, or law students in China, everyone relates to the film based on his or her own country's experience. So every country has its own dark side, including the United States. So there, for instance, today there are people saying, why was nobody ever prosecuted for slavery, for instance, or for the genocide of the American Indians? You know, this, when you show this film in America, people say, "Oh, it's not." If
they asking you questions.
Yes, they ask this question. And when we showed the film, Ben Ferenz and I showed the film at West Point, which is our top military academy, and a lot of the young military officers in training said, "Well, it's all very well to hold other people responsible. What about who holds us responsible?" And I was quite surprised by that reaction from these elite young army officers in training.
Sandra je naglasila kako nakon gledanja filma ljudi uvijek postavljaju pitanja. Na primjer, nakon prikazivanja u Rusiji pitaju se zašto nitko nije procesuiran za zločine koje je počinio Stalin. U Gvatemali, u kojoj je bilo masovnog ubijanja Maja, shvati da nisu jedina zemlja u kojoj se jedan dio naroda urotio protiv drugog. Film je dugo bio zabranjen, a shvatili su zašto tek kad su pronašli pismo njenog oca u kojemu se objašnjava da je to bilo zbog toga jer su smatrali da nije u redu što su vojnici koji su samo slušali naredbe s vrha uopće procesuirani. To je smetalo ljude u SAD-u i onda i danas.
What do you think, why for us in Croatia and Dubrovnik is important to see this movie?
Well, you know, when I was growing up, and I visited Yugoslavia when I was 19 years old, I remember coming to Dubrovnik, which I thought was an amazingly beautiful city, and I'm happy to see it's still amazingly beautiful. But it was one country, and I never dreamed at that age that the country would break apart into all these, 6 new countries. You all lived through a war that gave rise to this, and people turned on each other, people killed each other, people massacred each other. So I have a feeling this film will also speak to people here in Croatia and people throughout the Balkans. But I would love to know the reactions. We should look at ourselves and take responsibility for how we are being in the world. So I hope that this film reminds people that it's so much better to embrace our differences than to attack each other for our differences.
The International Criminal Court today is trying to take active jurisdiction over the crime of aggression for the first time since Nuremberg. And this is an important time for people to be hearing the message that the rule of law is better than the rule of force. And so this is what we need to be thinking about and moving forward toward.
Ono na što nas posebno upozorava Don Ferenc su riječi Hermana Geringa, koji je bio Hitlerov Reichsmaršal, a te su kako obični ljudi ni u Engleskoj, Rusiji pa ni u Njemačkoj ne žele rat, ali nakon svega vođe su oni koji stvaraju politiku i lako povlače ljude za sobom. Propagandom kako je zemlja u opasnosti prolazi i u parlamentarnim demokracijama jednako kao i u fašističkim državama i komunističkim diktaturama.
There is a lesson. The lesson is people cannot be complacent. Complacency is almost the same thing as complicity. You know, so often we heard after World War II that in Germany people said, "Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know this was going on." We have today the internet, we have television, we have media, we have film. People do know what's going on around the world today better than ever before, and people need to take a stand. They need to say, hey, you can't on the one hand sell Assad the chemical weapons that he uses to gas his own people and then come in later and say, this is a terrible crime he's committing. The people have the blood on their own hands. They have to look in the mirror and ask, what are we really doing? And what does our country really stand for? And what do we individually stand for? And they need to pay attention.